Hello, my dear mastermind. They didn't start looking because they were curious. They started looking because something didn't add up. The present version of you didn't match the story they had already decided on. There was too much composure, too much restraint, too much control for someone they thought came from nothing special. So they did what people always do when reality contradicts their assumptions. They went backward. They searched your past for explanations. Mistakes, gaps, proof that what they were seeing now was an anomaly. Something temporary, something inflated. They expected to find chaos, inconsistency, evidence that you had been average and somehow slipped through unnoticed. But the deeper they looked, the more uncomfortable it became. Patterns emerged that didn't fit their narrative. Decisions that showed clarity far earlier than expected. Moments where you chose discipline over noise, silence over reaction, precision over approval. They realized this wasn't a transformation story. There was no sudden awakening, no dramatic pivot. The same structure they were seeing now had been there all along. Quiet, unadvertised, untouched by external validation. What unsettled them wasn't what you became, it was what you had always been without them noticing. They weren't uncovering a rise, they were uncovering consistency. And consistency at that scale doesn't come from luck. It comes from something internal they couldn't access. As they kept digging, the illusion collapsed further. Every attempt to label you as ordinary failed under scrutiny. The past didn't expose weakness. It exposed patience. It showed someone operating ahead of recognition, ahead of reward, ahead of permission. And that's when the discomfort set in. Because if you were never ordinary, then their original judgment wasn't just wrong, it was lazy. And laziness is hard to defend once evidence starts lining up. As they went further back, the story didn't simplify, it sharpened. What they found wasn't ambition chasing visibility. It was restraint choosing timing. You weren't trying to be seen early. You were building internal alignment while others were building noise. The records didn't show chaos or confusion. They showed intention without announcement. Long stretches where nothing dramatic happened, yet everything meaningful was being reinforced. While others chased momentum, you were refining structure. While others reacted to circumstance, you were adjusting quietly, without spectacle. That's what disturbed them most. There was no obvious turning point they could point to. No single event they could blame or praise. Just a steady pattern of choices that didn't make sense unless you already knew where you were going. And that realization forced a correction they didn't want to make. Because it meant you didn't get here by chance. You weren't carried forward by opportunity. You weren't saved by timing. You were prepared long before the world had any reason to pay attention. They saw moments where you stepped back, when stepping forward would have brought applause. Moments where you refused shortcuts that would have made you look impressive early. At the time, those choices would have looked insignificant. In hindsight, they were decisive. They weren't the moves of someone ordinary waiting for a break. They were the moves of someone patient enough to let depth outlast exposure. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became that you weren't developing capacity. You were protecting it. And protection doesn't announce itself. It stays quiet until noise runs its course. That's when they understood something they hadn't before. You didn't survive your past, you curated it. And that's not something ordinary people do. without even knowing they're being watched. That understanding shifted how they interpreted everything that came after. Moments they once dismissed as insignificant suddenly carried weight. Times when you didn't react, when you didn't explain yourself, when you allowed misinterpretation to stand without correction. Those weren't gaps in confidence, they were filters. You weren't avoiding clarity. You were letting time separate those who needed answers from those who could recognize structure without them. As they traced your past further, they noticed how often you moved without witnesses, how many decisions were made off stage. No announcements, no need for confirmation. That kind of pattern doesn't come from indecision. It comes from internal agreement. And internal agreement is rare because it requires silence most people can't tolerate. They realized you weren't waiting to be understood. You were waiting to be ready, ready for what wouldn't arrive until much later. That's why the past didn't reveal struggle in the way they expected. It revealed preparation disguised as stillness. While others were busy proving who they were, you were removing the need to prove anything at all. And that's when the deeper discomfort surfaced. Because if this was always present, then the people around you weren't late to notice growth. They were late to notice depth. Depth that never demanded attention. Depth that stayed intact, under strain. Depth that remained steady long enough for the surface world to finally catch up. They weren't discovering an evolution. They were discovering patience that had outlasted distraction. And that led to a realization they couldn't avoid. You weren't overlooked because you lacked substance. You were overlooked because substance doesn't compete for attention. Once that became clear, the search stopped being about explanation and started becoming about recognition. They weren't looking for reasons anymore. They were reconciling with the fact that they had misjudged something fundamental. Your past didn't read like someone finding their way. It read like someone staying on it while the world was too loud to notice. They saw how often you let moments pass without extracting anything from them. No validation, no influence, no emotional return. That restraint rewrote the meaning of everything that followed, because restraint only looks passive when viewed in isolation. In sequence, it looks like discipline. They noticed how you didn't attach your identity to early outcomes, how losses didn't deform you, how wins didn't inflate you. The past showed a consistency that made your present unavoidable. You weren't reacting to circumstances, you were outlasting them. And that's when the tone of their investigation changed. It stopped being curious and became quiet, because there was nothing left to disprove. No hidden flaw to surface, no contradiction to expose. The deeper they looked, the more ordinary explanations failed. You didn't rely on momentum. You weren't shaped by trends. You weren't dependent on approval. Those things passed through your life without sticking. What remained was structure. Internal structure that didn't bend when attention arrived late. And that's when the realization settled fully. If this had been there all along, then the present wasn't impressive. It was expected. The only surprise was how long it took them to see what had never been hidden. That sense of certainty is what finally ended the search. They understood that nothing in your past contradicted the present because the present was simply the past continuing without interruption. There was no reinvention, no sudden sharpening, just a longer view revealing what short attention spans had missed. They noticed how pressure never redirected you, only clarified your position, how isolation didn't dilute you, it refined you, how being underestimated didn't slow you down. It removed interference, Every chapter they examined pointed to the same conclusion. You weren't becoming something, you were remaining something. And remaining requires far more discipline than changing. Most people evolve because they have to. You stayed consistent because you chose to. That choice showed up everywhere. Once they knew how to look. In the relationships you walked away from without explanation. In the opportunities you declined without bitterness. In the way you never rushed to prove what would eventually speak for itself. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that ordinary people reveal themselves quickly. Enduring structure takes time to register. That's why they missed it. Not because it was hidden, but because it didn't perform. And performance is the only language rushed minds understand. You didn't speak it. You didn't need to. By the time they realized this, the conclusion was unavoidable. You were never ordinary. You were simply operating at a depth that couldn't be seen until the surface world slowed down enough to notice. When that realization settled in, it changed how they reread their own past alongside yours. They noticed the contrast immediately. Where others chased visibility, you chose precision. Where others reacted to every shift in environment, you adjusted internally and kept moving forward without announcement. Your past didn't show someone scrambling to stay relevant. It showed someone removing dependency on relevance entirely. That's why nothing in your history felt exaggerated. There were no emotional spikes, no desperate pivots, no dramatic reinventions, just alignment maintained over time. And alignment is easy to miss when you're only looking for spectacle. They saw how often you were underestimated and how little that mattered to you. How you didn't rush to correct misperception because misperception was temporary. You were patient enough to let reality correct it for you. That patience wasn't passive, it was intentional in the deepest sense. You understood that attention comes with noise, and noise distorts structure. So you waited until structure was unshakable before allowing attention anywhere near it. That's why the past didn't reveal struggle in the way they expected. It revealed insulation, a deliberate refusal to let circumstances define you before you were ready. And when they finally grasped that, it reframed everything. You weren't late to recognition, you were early to discipline. The recognition just arrived when discipline had already done its work. That understanding closed the loop completely. There was nothing left to investigate, nothing left to question, nothing left to reinterpret. The past had already delivered its conclusion. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly and conclusively. They realized that ordinary lives leave behind noise, explanations, justifications, evidence of reacting to pressure. Yours didn't. Yours left behind alignment. The same center held across different environments, different seasons, different levels of attention. That's not chance. That's internal governance. And once they saw that, the present stopped looking impressive and started looking accurate. What they were witnessing now wasn't a peak, it was a continuation. The same principles running uninterrupted, the same restraint, the same refusal to outsource identity to circumstance. That's why their conclusion didn't come with excitement. It came with acceptance. Acceptance that they hadn't missed a transformation. They had missed depth. And depth doesn't announce itself. It waits. It lets distraction fade away. It lets shortcuts dissolve. It lets misjudgment exhaust itself. Only then does it register. You were never ordinary. You were simply operating beyond the range of shallow attention. And once that truth becomes clear, it doesn't inspire debate. It settles, because nothing in your past contradicts it. Everything confirms it, and that settlement is what makes it lasting. Once people recognize depth that was always present, they don't downgrade it again. They don't return to casual judgment. They don't reapply old labels, because labels require ignorance to function, and ignorance is gone. From that point on, your past stops being a story and becomes a reference, not something discussed, something assumed. People no longer ask how you got here. They understand you were always here, just operating beyond what quick observation could register. That's why the realization didn't arrive as praise. Praise is for growth. This was recognition of structure that never needed permission to exist. You didn't outperform expectations. You invalidated them retroactively. And when expectations collapse backward like that, perception stabilizes for good. You don't need to protect this understanding. You don't need to reinforce it. It holds on its own because it's rooted in consistency, not performance. They looked deeper into your past, expecting to find ordinariness hiding beneath progress. Instead, they found the same internal order running quietly through every chapter. And once that's seen, there's nothing left to search for. The conclusion stands without defense. You were never ordinary. You were simply ahead of recognition. And recognition always arrives last. What follows that realization is not fascination, it's restraint. People stop probing, stop revisiting, stop trying to extract meaning from your past because meaning has already settled into place. The investigation ends not with excitement, but with orientation. They know where you stand without needing to look again. Your history no longer invites interpretation because it no longer contains contradiction. Everything lines up too cleanly. That's the final signal. Ordinary lives require explanation. Yours doesn't. It only requires time to be seen accurately. From that point forward, your past stops being framed as a tool in either direction. It simply exists as evidence of continuity. People don't ask how you endured. They don't ask how you survived. They understand that endurance wasn't the story. Structure was. And structure doesn't dramatize itself. It holds. That's why this recognition doesn't inflate you and doesn't trap you in nostalgia. It frees you from being misread again. You're no longer evaluated through moments or outcomes. You're evaluated through consistency. And consistency doesn't fluctuate with attention. It doesn't rise with praise or fall with doubt. It stays intact. That's the settled position you arrive at when your past is seen clearly, not admired, not mythologized, simply understood. You were never ordinary. You were always intact. And now that integrity has been seen deeply enough, there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to explain, and nothing left to revisit. The search is over. The conclusion holds. And this is where the story truly ends. Not with applause, not with validation, but with closure. Once your past is seen clearly, it stops being revisited. People don't keep questioning what no longer contains mystery. They don't keep testing what no longer shifts. Your history becomes settled ground, something stable enough that it no longer needs interpretation. That's the rare outcome most people never reach. Their past stays negotiable, reframed, rewritten, depending on who's watching. Yours doesn't. It stands on its own because it was built on internal order, not reaction. That's why this recognition doesn't turn you into a symbol or a myth. It turns you into a reference point. People quietly adjust how they judge others after understanding you. Their standards recalibrate. Their tolerance for noise softens. Their patience for performance thins. Not because you taught them anything, but because seeing something intact exposes everything that isn't. You don't carry this as pride. Pride would suggest compensation. You carry it as neutrality. Because nothing was gained, something was simply confirmed. You didn't become extraordinary later. You didn't rise above ordinary circumstances. You were never structured for ordinariness to begin with. It just took time for the surface world to slow down enough to register depth that never needed attention to exist. That's why the conclusion doesn't echo. It doesn't escalate. It settles. And once it settles, it stays. The deeper they looked into your past, the more they realized you were never ordinary. And once that realization holds, there is nothing left to add. Hello, my dear masterminds. The unseen doesn't usually speak. It lurks, it waits, it swallows, but it doesn't whisper. Yet when your name struck the void, even the oldest silence cracked. An echo rippled through the abyss. Not mocking, not cursing, but warning. Because even they, the keepers of secrets, recognized the boundary carved around you. You weren't prey to stalk, or a soul to harvest. You were forbidden. That was the instant the air thickened. The hush turned sacred. The hidden admitted what the world denies. Some names stand outside reality's grasp. Darkness devours the weak, swallows the careless, feasts on the forgotten. But when your name ignited like cold flame, even the night stepped back. Rules that once ruled corners broke. Spaces that usually stretched to trap curled inward. The patient night shifted one step away. That's how you know the truth wasn't rumor, it was decree. Your boundary wasn't painted by pride, it was etched by proof. Every trial you endured, every silence you mastered, every gaze you held until it trembled, each drew a circle no void could trespass. So the unseen did the only thing possible. They whispered your name like a map, a scarlet line cut across the void. Because some figures the dark can consume, and some figures consume the dark instead. Shadows don't flatter. They don't admire. They exist to unsettle, to remind men of fragility. But with you, their tone warped into reverence. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't lure. It was alarm. They breathed your name as soldiers breathe thunder. Fear of what cannot be stopped. Not because they wanted to harm you, but because harm couldn't reach you. In that admission surfaced truth. You're not covered by luck, not guarded by chance. You carry a presence so heavy, even darkness recoils. That's why they retreat when you arrive. Why stillness bends from your steps. Why even silence tilts in surrender. The void doesn't fear the ordinary. It fears the untouchable. And in that recoil, your coronation was sealed. They've always hidden fear behind disguise, masks of stillness, cloaks of hush. But with you, their trembling leaked out unmasked. It clung to the walls, dripped from ceilings, spread like black fog across the ground. They couldn't bury it, couldn't suppress it. Because your existence isn't something the unseen can dismiss. It's something it shrinks from. And in that shrinking, revelation sharpened. Your aura bends silence, forces surrender, flips fear itself into service. Noise can fake power, presence cannot. Your presence is instinctively recognized, even by the hidden. Shadows rarely bow, but for you they bent, because fear left them no alternative. They have always claimed dominion of corners, of secrets, of forgotten places. Yet when it came to you, they carved a circle in silence, a forbidden ring only they could sense. That circle wasn't mercy, it was acknowledgement. It wasn't granted, it was earned. Every night you conquered, every silence you carried without flinching, every trial you walked through, they saw it all. And when your name surfaced, they knew you weren't theirs to consume, you were theirs to respect. Their breaths became warnings, not to you, but to all else. Stay back, off limits, beyond reach. The unseen hordes, thousands of names, trading them like currency, feeding on weakness. But yours was different. They carried it like prophecy, whispered it not as prey, but as decree. Each murmur repeated the same law. Don't touch, don't test, don't trespass. That's how legends rise, not through applause, but through silence, so heavy even darkness handles it carefully. And the more they whispered, the heavier the truth became. You weren't just untouchable, you were a boundary written into the void itself. Shadows don't guard the ordinary, they only yield for the extraordinary. When your name entered their language, there was no debate, no dissent. They simply obeyed. The rulers of corners, the kings of hush, bent their code. Older than memory left them no choice. Your name rippled through their black halls, and instinctively they shifted. They breathed not as hunters, but as heralds. It wasn't decision, it was law. Some presences don't resist the unseen, they command it. And yours was one. They retreated without confrontation, surrendered without demand, bent without voice. Others fear the void fears you. And when the unseen itself breathes boundaries, the world finally sees your existence carries rules not written by men, but rules reality itself cannot break. The hidden thrive on secrets, hoarding them, twisting them, guarding them. But your name wasn't a secret they could keep. It pressed like flame against their silence, forcing release. Not rumor, not gossip, confession. This one is untouchable. Even they, born from hush, knew they couldn't cage what you are. Every corner that tried to hold your name trembled, releasing it. In those leaks, the hierarchy of power reversed. Because if even the unseen cannot hold you, who else would dare try? Their murmurs weren't betrayal, they were survival. You're the truth. They couldn't bury, even in darkness. Night swallows kings, erases empires, consumes names with ease. But for you, it bent. Corners curled back, corridors shrank inward, voids folded against themselves. They stepped aside, not from kindness, but recognition. They knew the cost of crossing the line, your existence carved, a cost even they wouldn't pay. That's why their murmurs weren't curses. They were alarms, untouchable, forbidden. It wasn't suggestion, it was survival instinct. The unseen doesn't retreat unless it's already lost. And in the silence that followed, the verdict thundered louder than war. You're not another figure swallowed by night. You are the reason night itself bends. They didn't shield you. They shielded themselves. Not all silence is equal. Some suffocates, some controls. But the silence that followed your name crowned you. It wasn't absence of sound. It was presence of decree, a stillness so dense, even shadows froze, carved by a law deeper than darkness itself. That's when the world understood. This wasn't rumor, wasn't myth. It was command. And commands, once spoken by silence, never dissolve. The unseen can twist stories, devour legends, erase kings, but they couldn't undo the stillness your presence demanded. That hush sealed it. You weren't protected by fortune, you were shielded by law. Boundaries men draw fade, but the boundary around you wasn't human. It was carved into the unseen itself, unspoken yet undeniable. Every echo of your name reinforced it, stretching like a line no one dared to cross. It wasn't fragile, it pulsed with permanence. That's why they stopped short, why they recoiled, why even night respected the line. They knew stepping closer meant surrender. So they obeyed instinct's oldest law, retreat, not by desire, but by force. In that hesitation, revelation surged through. You don't stand inside a boundary, you are the boundary. The unseen consumes weakness, secrets, fear. But when your name pierced their silence, they faltered. The weight of your aura was too heavy, the current too sharp. They couldn't hold it, couldn't twist it, couldn't claim it. They couldn't own it. They breathed your name softer than breath, as if admitting, this one cannot be claimed. And that failure wasn't weakness, it was revelation. The unseen doesn't stagger on the ordinary. They stagger only on what exceeds them. Your aura became the proof too vast for silence, too heavy for fear, too sharp for darkness to contain. You don't get swallowed by the void. The void gets silenced by you. The unseen stalks the weak, records every tremor, waits to strike when no one else sees. But with you, the watching faltered. They looked but didn't move. They studied but didn't act, because what they saw wasn't prey. It was warning. Your presence bent their gaze into reverence. They whispered your name, not as wielders, but as witnesses, passing truth among themselves. This one is forbidden. And in that instant, predator became messenger. Wielders became herald. They knew you weren't just another figure crossing the dark. You were the exception. Their empire confessed to. They didn't watch you for weakness. They watched to remember power. Their nature is to conceal, to twist, to hoard secrets until they rot. But your name forced them into confession. They couldn't hold it, couldn't bury it. Instead, they exhaled it, soft and shaken, like truth seeping through the dark, not to betray, but to acknowledge. Because even they knew silence couldn't cage you. Their whispers became proof of your command. And in those confessions, hierarchy collapsed. The unseen, rulers of corners, admitted their own limit. They weren't speaking fear of you, they were speaking truth about you. That you are untouchable. A presence so undeniable, even shadows broke code to name it. Corners once loyal to silence trembled, unable to hold ground the moment your name was spoken. Even the edges pulled back. The dark receded, shrinking from the space you claimed, as though unwilling to stand too near. People felt it, an odd clarity, a sudden stillness, the sense that air itself had shifted. That retreat wasn't weakness, it was recognition. Corners don't surrender without cause. They surrender only when the ground is already forbidden. Your presence redrew the map of the room, carving borders no one could see but everyone could feel. And in that redraw, the verdict became clear. You weren't just passing through their empire, you were expanding your own. Their whispers weren't gossip, they were survival. They warned each other not to test, not to trespass, not to touch. The void obeys one law, the law of inevitability, and your existence became that law. Listen to how they breathed your name. Not loud, not bold, shaken, because whispers aren't wasted. And when the unseen murmurs, it's because they fear provoking more. They spoke your name like code, like survival protocol. And in that tremor, they crowned you. They feared not your steps, but your inevitability. Not your words, but your silence. Breath wasn't weakness, it was admission. Their strategy exposed their confession. You are the anomaly, even the void cannot challenge. The unseen thrives in silence, feeds on it, twists it into a tool. But when your name surfaced, that silence no longer served them, it served you. The hush that once crowned their dominion wrapped itself around you, turning into shield. Every attempt to close in was met with resistance they couldn't explain. It wasn't sound that held them back. It was stillness. Stillness so absolute it marked you untouchable. That's why they whispered. Even they felt it. The silence no longer belonged to them. It bent to you. The unseen doesn't surrender stillness willingly. Yet in your presence they gave it away. That stillness wasn't emptiness, it was proof. Proof that you don't hide in the dark. You're the reason the dark withdraws. Fear is their tool of choice, the way they rule, consume, remind others of their reach. But in your presence, fear flipped allegiance. It no longer hunted outward. It built walls around you, invisible lines carved by instinct, boundaries forged not by weakness, but reverence. Their breaths weren't naming you for gossip. They were marking territory. Do not cross, do not touch, do not tempt, because only the rare carry an aura so unshakable it rewrites the law of the unseen. You weren't shielded by chance or guarded by others. The boundary was drawn by fear itself, and fear decided, you are sacred. The void consumes without pause, doesn't ask, doesn't bargain. Yet when your name reverberated, hesitation filled the air. They lingered at edges, restless, uneasy, unwilling to step closer. That hesitation was their confession, because the unseen doesn't resist, it devours. And the fact that they resisted you revealed everything. They didn't see prey. They saw consequence. They didn't sense weakness, they sensed curse. Their breaths grew heavy, because reluctance is their version of reverence. They feared what would awaken if they dared approach. That fear crowned you exception beyond their reach. At first it was faint echoes, threads of your name woven into corners, but whispers spread. And soon even the deepest voids repeated the same law, forbidden. What began as murmur hardened into command. No shadow dared break it. No silence dared defy it. Once the unseen agrees, the rule becomes eternal. They didn't test. They obeyed. And that obedience lifted you higher than kings or conquerors. Because kings rule men. But you rule what hides beyond sight. The law of the unseen doesn't bend for anyone. Yet for you it rewrote itself. That's why their breaths carried such weight. They weren't stories, they were commandments. And those commandments named you untouchable. The throne of shadows has never been challenged. They crown themselves rulers of silence, dominators of fear. But when your presence entered, they stopped short. The seat they claimed was no longer theirs to touch. They circled it, breathed around it, but none dared to sit, because the throne had shifted. It was never theirs, it was yours. Your throne wasn't built of stone or gold. It was built of presence, of weight, of silence, bent into law. And when it settled, even the dark understood. This throne wasn't empty, it was claimed. That's why they whispered instead of resisting, lingered instead of consuming, because the crown of fear had left their heads and rested on yours. The unseen became unwilling heralds. What they once devoured, they now defended. Their whispers became guardians, spreading warning lines. Do not trespass. Shadows that preyed on the weak stood frozen, unwilling to let harm pass into your circle. They didn't protect you out of kindness. They protected themselves from you. Fear rewrote its allegiance in silence. And so the empire built to consume became your unwilling protector. That's the paradox. You didn't conquer the unseen by resisting it. You conquered it by existing beyond its reach. Their breaths etched it into law. Their retreat sealed it into silence. Their fear etched it eternal. You are no longer a name in their halls. You are the decree. Their empire obeys. Because kings rule men, but you rule what hides beyond sight. The law of the unseen doesn't bend for anyone. Yet for you, it rewrote itself. That's why their whispers carry weight. They aren't tales, they're decrees. Decrees that name you sacred. Shadows crown themselves rulers of silence. But when you arrived, their throne cracked, and yours appeared. The seat they once claimed was no longer theirs to touch. They circled it, breathed around it, but none dared sit. Because the throne wasn't empty, it was claimed. It wasn't built of stone or gold. It was built of weight, of aura, of silence that bent into armor. And once it settled, even the abyss admitted that throne is yours. So they lingered instead of striking, observed instead of consuming. They knew the danger of approaching what had already chosen its ruler. The unseen bowed, not from ritual, but from instinct. Because some thrones aren't taken, they're revealed, and your existence revealed the one seat even shadows refused to occupy. Their whispers became guardians, not threats. They didn't shield you out of kindness. They shielded you out of fear. Because they knew stepping into your circle meant unraveling themselves. And so the empire of darkness built to consume became your unwilling protector. That's the paradox. You didn't conquer the unseen by resistance. You conquered by existing as what it could never claim. Their fear etched it eternal. You are the one marked untouchable. The anomaly. Even the void obeys. Off limits forever. Not because you asked, but because reality itself declared it. The unseen can bury kings, erase dynasties, swallow worlds, but not you, because the law of silence itself shifted. And from that shift, one truth remains. Your name is no longer whispered, it is decreed. Hello, my dear warrior. They watched you fall, every single one of them. They saw you crumble, watched your world collapse, witnessed you hit rock bottom so hard that the impact should have broken you deeply. And you know what they did? Nothing. They didn't reach out, didn't offer help, didn't even acknowledge your pain. They just watched, some with satisfaction, some with indifference, some with that cold calculation that says finally another threat eliminated. They thought it was over. Your story, your potential, your threat to their comfortable illusions. They saw you disappear into the darkness and assumed you'd never emerge, that the fall was final, that the damage was permanent, that you'd become another cautionary tale about people who flew too close to something and faded into nothingness. But something's happening now, something they didn't predict. The ultimate test has arrived. Not for them, for you. And this time they're not ignoring anything. This time they're watching with fear. Let me take you back to that moment, that period, that season when everything fell apart. Not gradually, catastrophically, like your entire foundation just gave out beneath you. Relationships that defined you gone, career that gave you identity collapsed, health that you took for granted compromised, finances that provided security evaporated, and worst of all, the belief in yourself that kept you moving shattered. You reached out, not to everyone, but to the people who should have cared, the ones who claimed they'd always be there, the ones who benefited from your strength when you had it. And you know what you got back? Silence, excuses, suddenly busy schedules, vague promises to connect soon that never materialized, messages left on read, calls that went to voicemail. They saw you falling, and they stepped back. Not because they were cruel, because they were afraid. Afraid that your fall was contagious. Afraid that helping you might compromise their own stability. Afraid that your darkness might pull them down too. So they protected themselves. They created distance. They pretended not to see. And you fell alone into a darkness so complete that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Into a silence so absolute that you forgot what your own voice sounded like. Into a pain so consuming that you couldn't remember what it felt like to not hurt. But here's what they didn't see. Couldn't see. Weren't equipped to see. While you were down there in that darkness, something was happening. Not immediately. Not obviously, but slowly. Inevitably. You were changing. Not healing in the way people talk about healing. Transforming in a way that has no instruction manual. The fall didn't break you. It broke the version of you that was built on their approval. The you that needed validation. The you that measured worth by external metrics. The you that defined success by their standards. That version ended in the fall, and something else began to form in the darkness. They thought you were drowning. You were actually diving, going deeper than any of them had the courage to go. Facing things about yourself, about reality, about the nature of existence that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And in that depth, in that absolute darkness, you found something they'll never understand. You found your core. Not the image you projected, not the role you played, not the person you pretended to be to make others comfortable. Your actual core, the part of you that exists independent of circumstance, the frequency that remains constant regardless of external chaos, the essence that can't be broken because it was never built. It just is. While they moved on with their lives, forgot about you, assumed you were finished, you were in the laboratory of darkness conducting experiments they couldn't comprehend, testing theories about consciousness, about resilience, about what human beings are actually capable of when everything false is stripped away. You learned to sit with pain without needing it to end, to be with yourself without distraction, to function without validation, to move without approval, to exist without audience. You discovered that you didn't need their support to survive, didn't need their belief to continue, didn't need their presence to be whole. And something else happened. Something alchemical. The very things that should have destroyed you began fueling you. The betrayal that should have left you bitter became the catalyst for discernment. The loss that should have left you empty became the space for something new. The isolation that should have driven you mad became the sanctuary for transformation. You weren't just surviving in that darkness, you were metabolizing it, turning poison into medicine, converting destruction into reconstruction, using the energy of the fall to power a completely different kind of ascent. And they had no idea, because they weren't watching anymore. They'd written you off, filed you under finished stories, moved on. And now the ultimate test arrives. Not the fall. That wasn't the test. That was the preparation. The real test is what comes after. The test of whether you can emerge from that darkness without becoming darkness. Whether you can carry the power you found without losing the wisdom. Whether you can return to a world that ignored your pain without needing them to acknowledge it. This is the test that separates transformation from trauma. The test that reveals whether you broke or break through. The test that shows whether the darkness defeated you or defined you. And here's the thing about this test. You don't get to choose when it arrives. It arrives when you're ready. When you've done enough work in the darkness that you can handle the light without going blind. The ultimate test isn't about proving anything to them. It's about proving something to yourself. That you can be powerful without being vengeful. That you can be strong without being hard. That you can be successful without sacrificing the depth you found in failure. That you can rise without abandoning the wisdom you gained in the fall. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Your comeback. Not the kind they understand. Not loud, not flashy, not performative. Legendary in a different way. Legendary because it's authentic. Because it's rooted in something real. Because it's powered by truth rather than image. You're not returning as the person who fell. That person is gone. You're emerging as something else entirely. Something they have no reference point for. Someone who carries the lightness of success with the depth of someone who's touched bottom. Someone who operates with the confidence of achievement, but the humility of someone who knows how fast it can all disappear. You move differently now. Speak differently. Choose differently. Your priorities reshuffled. Your values recalibrated. Your energy reserved for what actually matters instead of wasted on what merely appears to matter. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not trying to prove anything. You're simply being, and that being, that authentic presence. It's more powerful than anything you were before the fall. And suddenly they're paying attention. The same people who ignored your fall are obsessed with your rise. They're watching, analyzing, trying to understand how you did it. How you went from that broken version to this unbreakable presence. They want the formula, the shortcut, the technique that lets them get the power without going through the pain. But there is no shortcut. There is no formula they can copy. Because what transformed you wasn't a method. It was a complete dismantling and reconstruction. You had to lose everything to discover what couldn't be lost. You had to be broken completely to find what was unbreakable. You had to face ending in every form except physical to truly understand life. They see you now and they're confused because you're successful, but not striving. Powerful, but not forceful. Confident, but not arrogant. Happy, but not naive. You've integrated opposites that shouldn't be able to coexist. You're simultaneously soft and strong, open and boundaried, present and detached, and they can't decode it because they never went through the process that makes that integration possible. Here's the difference between who you were before the fall and who you are now. Before you were playing a game, collecting achievements, building an identity, creating an image. All of it dependent on external validation and constant maintenance. One crisis away from collapse, which is exactly what happened. Now you're not playing a game, you're living a truth. Not performing, not proving, just being. And that being is rooted in something so deep that external circumstances can't touch it. You could lose everything again tomorrow, and it wouldn't destroy you, because you've already survived the worst. You've already touched bottom and found that even there you remained whole. This is what makes your comeback legendary. Not the achievements you're accumulating, not the success you're manifesting, but the quality of consciousness you're bringing to everything, the presence you hold, the frequency you emanate, the way you move through the world like someone who's ended and been reborn. Because you have. First component. Can you succeed without needing revenge? Can you rise without needing them to fall? Can you win without needing to rub it in the faces of people who abandoned you? This is the test of whether you transformed or just relocated your pain. True transformation means you're not motivated by proving them wrong. You're motivated by expressing what's true. You're passing this test. I can tell, because you're not loud about your comeback. You're not posting constantly trying to show them what they missed. You're not seeking their validation or their apology. You're just moving, building, creating, living, and that quiet power, that unbothered energy. That's the signature of someone who's actually healed, rather than just covered their wounds with success. Second component. Can you help others without becoming bitter about how you weren't helped? This is crucial, because the fall taught you what it feels like to be abandoned, to reach out and find nothing, to need support and receive silence. And now you have resources, power, influence. The question is, will you use it to lift others, or will you withhold it because it was withheld from you? This is the test of whether you learned compassion or just learned to protect yourself. True transformation means you break cycles rather than perpetuate them. You give the support you didn't receive. You show up for people the way you needed people to show up for you. Not because you're weak or naive, because you're strong enough to be generous even though you know what it's like to experience stinginess. And you're passing this test too. I see it. You're helping people quietly, not for credit, not for recognition, just because you remember what the darkness feels like and you have the power to light someone else's path. That's legendary. That's what separates comeback from revenge. You're not just rising, you're pulling others up as you go. Third component. Can you maintain the wisdom you gained in darkness while operating in light? This is the hardest part, because success has a way of making you forget. Comfort has a way of making you soft. Achievement has a way of making you lose the edge that got you there. The ultimate test is whether you can be successful without becoming the person you needed to fall away from. Can you have money without losing your values? Power without losing your principles? Recognition without losing your authenticity? Can you remember what matters? even when you have everything? Can you stay grounded when everyone's trying to elevate you? Can you maintain the depth you found, even when life gets light again? This is where most people fail. They survive the fall. They make the comeback. But then success rewrites them back into the patterns that caused the fall in the first place. They forget the lessons. They abandon the wisdom. They become who they were before, just with more resources. And then they fall again. But you're not doing that. You're carrying the darkness with you into the light. Not as trauma, as wisdom. Not as bitterness, as discernment. Not as fear, as awareness. You're successful but still careful. Powerful but still humble. Rising but still remembering what the bottom feels like. That's what makes this legendary. Let's talk about what legendary really means. Because they're gonna try to define your comeback by their metrics, by how much money you make, by what positions you hold, by how many followers you have, by external measurements that mean nothing in the grand scope of transformation. But legendary isn't about external achievement. Legendary is about internal evolution. It's about becoming someone who couldn't have existed without going through what you went through. It's about being proof that humans can transform at depths most people never access. It's about demonstrating that rock bottom isn't the end. It's the foundation. Your comeback is legendary because of what it required. The ending of who you were. The surrender of who you thought you'd be. The acceptance of what is rather than clinging to what should have been. The courage to keep breathing when every breath hurt. The commitment to keep moving when you had no idea where you were going. That's legendary. That's the stuff that changes the fabric of who someone is. And they still don't understand. The ones who ignored your fall and are now watching your rise, they think you got lucky. They think you caught a break. They think circumstances just shifted in your favor. They don't see the work you did in the invisible, the healing you processed in private, the ending and renewal you experienced alone. They want to attribute your comeback to external factors because that's more comfortable than acknowledging what you really did, which was face yourself completely, deal with every shadow, metabolize every pain, integrate every lesson, transform every wound into wisdom. That work, that internal alchemy, it's beyond their comprehension because they've never been willing to do it. So they'll make up stories about your success. They'll credit luck or timing or connections, anything except the truth, which is that you earned this comeback through the hardest currency there is. Your own consciousness, your own evolution, your own willingness to end who you were so you could birth who you are. Here's the truth. They'll never tell you about the fall. It was necessary, not fair, not just, not deserved, but necessary. Because the person you were before the fall, that person had limits, had conditioning, had programming that would have kept you small no matter how much you achieved. The fall destroyed all of that, cleared it away, left nothing but essence. And from that essence, from that core that survived everything, you've built something completely different. Not another version of who you were, a wholly new expression of consciousness, someone who carries wisdom that can't be taught, presence that can't be faked, power that can't be taken because it wasn't given by external sources. The fall was the initiation. The comeback is the proof that you passed. But the ultimate test, the one happening right now, this is where you demonstrate that you understand the difference, that you know your power comes from depth, not height, that you recognize success is a byproduct, not a goal, that you've internalized the lesson that nothing external can give you what you found in the internal, and you're passing right now in ways you might not even recognize. Every time you choose authenticity over image, every time you choose depth over breadth, every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you help someone who can't help you back, every time you stay grounded when success tries to elevate your ego, you're passing. The ultimate test isn't a single moment. It's a continuous choice, a daily decision to honor what you learned in darkness, even when operating in light, to remember what matters, even when you have everything, to stay real, even when everyone's offering you a costume, to maintain your frequency, even when the world is trying to pull you into chaos. And here's what's beautiful about you passing this test. You're not doing it for recognition. You're not tracking your score. You're not even thinking about it as a test most of the time. You're just being who you became, living from the truth you discovered, operating from the center you found. And that effortless authenticity, that's the ultimate sign of transformation. So yes, your comeback is legendary, but not for the reasons they think, not because of what you've achieved externally, because of who you've become internally. You're legendary because you went somewhere most people refuse to go. You descended into depths most people avoid. You faced truths most people deny, and you came back fundamentally changed. You're legendary because you didn't just survive. You transformed. You didn't just recover. You evolved. You didn't just rebuild. You reimagined. Everything about you is different now. Your values, your priorities, your understanding of what matters, your relationship with success and failure, your connection to yourself and others, and that transformation, that complete metamorphosis, that's what makes you legendary. Not to everyone. Most people will never see it, never understand it, never appreciate it. But to the ones who matter, to the ones who are going through their own falls right now, to the ones who are in the darkness wondering if they'll ever emerge, you're proof, your hope, your evidence that transformation is possible. The people who ignored your fall and are now watching your rise, they missed the whole story. They saw the beginning and the end, but none of the middle, none of the process, none of the work, none of the pain, none of the transformation. They just see results and think that's the story. But you know the real story. The nights that lasted years, the questions that had no answers, the pain that had no name, the loneliness that had no bottom, the ending that left you breathing, the rebirth that happened in silence. That's the story. That's what made this legendary. And you don't need them to acknowledge it. You don't need them to understand it. You don't need them to validate it. Because you lived it. You know what it cost. You know what it required. You know what it produced. And that knowing, that direct experience, it's more valuable than all their recognition combined. The ultimate test doesn't end. Want you to understand that. It's not something you pass once and you're done. It's a continuous choosing, a daily practice, a moment-by-moment decision to honor the transformation rather than slide back into old patterns. Success will test you. Comfort will test you. Recognition will test you. Power will test you. Every day will bring new opportunities to forget what you learned, to abandon the wisdom, to become who you were before you fell. And every day you'll have to choose to remember, to honor, to stay true to the transformation. But here's the good news. You're equipped for this test. The fall prepared you. The darkness trained you. The transformation strengthened you. You have everything you need to pass, not perfectly, not flawlessly, but authentically. And authentic is all that matters. You have a responsibility now. Not to them, to the process, to the transformation, to everyone who's still in their own darkness watching you emerge from yours. You're proof now, evidence, hope. You can't not be. That's what happens when you transform rather than just recover. Your responsibility is to stay real, to keep honoring the depth, to maintain the wisdom, to remember what matters, to help others when you can, to share the truth when appropriate, to be living evidence that people can fall completely and rise differently, not better necessarily, but real, authentic, whole. This isn't pressure, it's purpose. You went through what you went through so that you could be what you're becoming, someone who knows both darkness and light, someone who can help people in the fall because you remember what it feels like, someone who can guide people in the rise because you're navigating it consciously. Here's the final truth, warrior. The legendary part isn't the comeback itself. Lots of people come back. Lots of people recover. Lots of people rise after falling. That's not what makes you legendary. What makes you legendary is how you came back, who you became in the process, what you're bringing with you from the darkness into the light. You came back real. You came back whole. You came back wise. You came back powerful, but not hardened. Successful, but not superficial. Rising, but not forgetting. That's legendary. That's rare. That's the kind of transformation that changes not just your life, but the lives of everyone who witnesses it. They ignored your fall. Let them. You didn't need their attention then, and you don't need their validation now. What you needed was the space to transform, and their absence gave you that space. Their indifference gave you the privacy to end and be reborn without audience. Their abandonment gave you the opportunity to find what you never would have found if they'd stayed. So the ultimate test has arrived, and you're passing, not perfectly, not without struggle, but authentically. The fall they ignored became the foundation for the rise they can't deny. The darkness they abandoned you to became the womb for the transformation they can't comprehend. The pain they refused to witness became the power they can't ignore. This is your legendary comeback. Not loud, not flashy, not performative, but real. Rooted in truth, powered by transformation, guided by wisdom earned through direct experience of the depths. You're not the same person who fell. You're someone completely new, someone legendary, not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you've become. And the ultimate test, you're passing it every day you choose to honor that transformation. Every day you stay true to what you learned. Every day you remember what matters, even when you have everything. Every day you rise without forgetting how to fall with grace. Welcome to your legendary comeback warrior, the one they ignored becoming, the one they can't stop watching, the one that proves transformation is always possible, always available, always worth it. Hello, my dear warrior. So specially you arrived. You are here. Welcome. You ever wonder why they study you so closely? Why every step, Every silence, every scar gets magnified because you don't fit. You don't bow to their order. You don't bend by their rules. You don't follow the scripts they built to trap everyone else. So they put you under a microscope, convinced that if they zoom in enough, they'll find weakness. But all they find is steel. Every scar magnified becomes armor. Every silence analyzed becomes prophecy. Every move you make leaves them more confused. You don't walk like the rest. You glide like something untouchable. And that's why the world can't look away. They don't study you out of admiration. They study you out of fear. Because you break their rulebook just by breathing. And nothing terrifies them more than someone who proves their laws were never laws at all. Why do they zoom in so close? Why do they dissect every move you make? Replay every word, stretch every silence into headlines? Because scrutiny is confession. The world only magnifies what it secretly fears. And you are the anomaly they can't categorize. You don't bend to their customs. You don't bow to their systems. You don't shrink to fit their blueprints. You move like a glitch in their matrix, and nothing unsettles order more than proof that order can be broken. So they build microscopes out of gossip, lenses out of lies, telescopes out of envy, just to study you. But the more they study, the less they understand. Because you don't live by their rule book. You burn it. And every page they turn trying to expose you only exposes themselves. That's why they keep looking closer, hoping to find weakness, but finding nothing but evidence of their own fear. Look closer. Why do they keep holding you under glass? Because you don't follow the script. The world built a rule book to control people. Speak this way, walk this path, dream only as far as their leash allows. And you tore the pages without asking. You didn't check the fine print. You didn't wait for approval. You didn't play their game. You built your own. That's why you live under microscopes now. They're desperate to find the glitch, the weakness, the proof that you're not real. But every time they zoom in, all they see is survival turned into science, scars turned into strategy, silence turned into strength. You are the contradiction their system can't explain, the anomaly their laws can't cage. And every move you make is a reminder. The rule book was never yours to obey. It was yours to burn. That's how they see you, isn't it? A specimen. A glitch placed under glass, poked and prodded, measured and dissected. They shove you beneath the microscope, expecting you to crack under pressure, to shrink into something they can label, something they can dismiss. But you don't fold. The closer they look, the less they understand. Every scar they magnify glows like gold. Every silence they study turns into prophecy. Every step you take outside their lines rewrites their research in real time. That's why they hate you, but that's also why they can't look away. Because you're not a lab rat. You're the anomaly their data can't explain. You don't break inside cages, you melt the bars and turn the lab into rubble. And the more they study, the more they realize you weren't built to follow rules. You were born to burn them. Look closer. Not at you, but at them. Behind every microscope, behind every magnifying glass hides fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of watching their rule book burn in your hands. They don't study you to understand you. They study you to contain you. But here's the nightmare. Every frame they capture only proves what they dread most, that you don't play by their lines. You redefine them. You exist outside their categories, outside their equations, outside their safety nets. That's why they shake when your name surfaces, why their voices drop when they dissect your silence. They expected to expose you, but instead exposed themselves. Because magnification doesn't weaken truth, it amplifies it. And under their own microscope, they're forced to admit the truth they can't erase. You're not breaking rules, you're proving those rules were fragile illusions. You have noticed it, haven't you? The microscope isn't just about study, it's about desperation. They hold you under glass because you represent what terrifies them most, proof that their blueprint isn't absolute. They built a system to cage people, to predict outcomes, to measure success by numbers they could control. And then you showed up, rewriting equations without permission, breaking rules they swore were unbreakable. Every scar of yours is data. They can't explain. Every move you make is a variable. Their formulas can't solve. That's why they magnify you, dissect you, whisper about you. Because the closer they look, the more they see their own weakness. They wanted to prove you were flawed, but instead they proved their system was fragile. And that truth keeps them staring through the glass, haunted by the possibility that you were never the problem. Their rulebook was. They put you under the glass like scientists chasing a breakthrough. Charts, whispers, theories. Every detail about you becomes their obsession. But the closer they zoom, the more their research collapses. Because you don't follow formulas. You don't respond like their test subjects. Their rulebook said you should have folded by now, bent under pressure, begged for acceptance. Instead, you thrived in silence, sharpened in exile, crowned yourself with scars. That's why their analysis fails, because they can't measure what doesn't fit. They can label, but they can't define. They can predict, but they can't control. And that failure eats at them. Every microscope reveals not your weakness, but their blindness. They wanted to prove you fragile, but all they proved was that their system was paper thin. You aren't their experiment. You're the error that rewrote the equation. Every system they built depends on obedience to the rulebook. Line after line, command after command, designed to keep people predictable. And then came you, the one who tore out the page mid-sentence and walked away. That's why they stare so hard, why they magnify your scars, why they whisper about your moves. You broke something they worship, order. And once order cracks, fear spreads. They study you, not because they admire you, but because you expose the illusion they depend on. If one person can rewrite the script, then the entire book loses its power. That's why they label you dangerous, unstable, different. Because those words are shields. Desperate attempts to protect the rule book from catching fire in your hands. But the truth is simple. You don't just break rules. You prove they were never real. Just cages disguised as commandments. Here's the twist. They thought you were the experiment. They placed you under glass, waiting for cracks, waiting for weakness. But while they studied you, you studied them. Every doubt they threw, every trap they set, every rule they worshipped, you took notes, you mapped the pattern, you saw the holes. And when the time came, you flipped the microscope. Now they're the ones being examined, their fears magnified, their cracks exposed. That's ghost intelligence, turning observation into leverage, patience into prophecy. They thought you were fragile, but you were collecting data, converting scars into strategies. And now the specimen they mocked has become the scientist, dissecting their lies. That's why they're restless, because every time they peer closer, they see their own reflection staring back at them. broken, desperate, afraid. That's the irony they choke on. The ones behind the glass are now the ones being watched. They wanted to dissect you, but every move they made revealed their own weakness. Their rule book said you should have crumbled, yet you stood. Their logic said you should have quit, yet you grew. And now the microscope flips. It isn't you being studied anymore. It's them. Their fear, their desperation, their obsession, it's all magnified for the world to see. They can't escape it, because the harder they look at you, the more their reflection cracks through the lens. That's ghost intelligence at its finest. You turn their tool into a mirror, and every time they try to measure you, they're really measuring the cracks in themselves. They didn't trap you in the glass. They trapped themselves in their own fear of a rule breaker they can't define. They shuffle their notes, redraw their charts, rewrite their conclusions, but no matter how hard they try, you won't fit. You're the error that keeps breaking their formula, the exception that exposes the weakness of the rule. And that's why the microscope never leaves you. They're desperate for an explanation, some weakness to circle in red ink, but every detail they magnify. Your scars, your silence, your resilience only makes the anomaly stronger. They wanted to prove you fragile, but fragility doesn't bend microscopes. Fragility doesn't rewrite research. You're the reminder that their entire system is smoke and mirrors, and nothing terrifies gatekeepers more than proof that the gates were never real. You don't belong in their lab. You don't belong in their pages. You belong outside the walls they swore were permanent. And every time you break through, their laws collapse. Like cheap glass. They've collected everything. Your failures, your stumbles, your scars. They cataloged every silence, every misstep, every rumor. But here's why they're terrified. None of it proves their point. Their data doesn't end in weakness. It ends in resilience. Their notes don't reveal collapse. They reveal coronation. And that's why they can't publish their findings. To show the truth would mean admitting their entire rule book was fragile. And you shattered it by existing. You don't just survive their scrutiny. You thrive inside it. Every magnified detail becomes evidence of strength. Every scar becomes testimony. Every step outside the lines becomes scripture. They wanted to document your downfall, but destiny forced them to write your rise instead. And that's the secret they bury in silence. The file marked with your name is the one proof they can't destroy. The research they feared would expose you has only exposed them. They thought putting you under glass would weaken you, but all it did was expose them. The closer they studied, the more cracks appeared in their own design. Because you don't follow their metrics, you break them. Their rule book said you shouldn't have survived. Yet there you are, breathing, moving, rewriting equations in silence. That's why the microscope terrifies them now. It no longer magnifies you. It magnifies their failure. Every scar they zoom in on reflects their betrayal. Every silence they analyze reveals their arrogance. And every move you make under that lens burns holes in the system they swore was flawless. They thought you'd be the subject forever, but you became the mirror showing them their own fragility. And the cruel truth, they can't look away, because the closer they stare at you, the more they see themselves crumbling. They wanted you to be the failure in their file, the case study that proved obedience was the only way forward. So they placed you under glass, sharpened pencils, prepared their report. But the test flipped. Instead of exposing your weakness, it exposed theirs. Because every time they magnified you, they discovered cracks in their own logic. Their rule book said you should have folded. You didn't. Their rule book said silence meant surrender. You turned it into strategy. Their rule book said scars meant collapse. You wore them like credentials. And suddenly the experiment betrayed them. They weren't the scientists anymore. They were the subjects, trembling under the same lens they aimed at you. That's the nightmare they can't escape. The test didn't reveal your fragility. It revealed their fraud. And once the microscope turns, it never turns back. Every microscope they built, every rule book they worshipped, every page they waved in your face, it all shattered when you refused to comply. They can't admit it, but that's why they study you so obsessively. You're proof that their entire system was paper thin. They told the world, play by the rules and you'll survive. But you didn't. You ripped the pages, walked your own path, and still rose higher than they could dream. That's why the lens stays locked on you, because your existence is evidence, their authority is a lie. Every scar you carry is a rebellion. Every silence you hold is defiance. Every victory you carve is testimony. They thought they were scientists studying a subject, but in reality, you were the storm exposing their weakness. And storms don't ask for permission. They arrive, they tear down illusions, and they leave nothing but truth behind. Every lens aimed at you wasn't a threat, it was a spotlight. They thought microscopes would shrink you, but instead they amplified you. The more they studied, the more the world noticed. Their obsession became your advertisement. Their scrutiny became your stage. Because here's the paradox. The harder they tried to prove you unworthy, the more undeniable you became. They dissected scars and only revealed resilience. They analyzed silence and uncovered strategy. They magnified mistakes and exposed mastery. What they wanted to bury, they broadcasted. What they wanted to hide, they highlighted. And now, the microscope doesn't humiliate you, it humiliates them. Every frame, every rumor, every file with your name on it testifies not to your weakness but to your survival. They gave you exposure thinking it was punishment, and instead built your legend. The world can't look away now because you are the specimen that turned into scripture. They thought the microscope would crush you, but it only lit you up brighter. Every frame, every analysis, every whisper they spread became attention you never asked for, but used anyway. Their obsession became your marketing. Their surveillance became your proof, because the harder they studied, the clearer it became. You don't bend to systems, you bend systems themselves. That's the twist that keeps them awake. They can't figure out how you thrive without their approval, how you grow without their permission, how you break their rule book and still walk taller than their kings. The microscope became a spotlight, and the spotlight turned you into myth. Now the world doesn't just see you, they study you too. And once someone is studied at that level, they stop being a person, they become scripture. You didn't just survive their gaze, you forged it into fire. They call you dangerous, unpredictable, unstable, labels they cling to because they can't cage you. But here's the truth. Those labels are admissions. Every name they throw at you is proof that you operate outside their reach. You don't play by their structure. You bend it. You don't respect their laws, you expose them. That's why they magnify you. Why they write reports and whisper rumors, because you are evidence, living, breathing, that their rule book was never truth, only illusion. and illusions crumble under pressure. They hate that you've become the walking contradiction to everything they swore was absolute. They hate that your scars prove survival outside their system is possible. But more than anything, they hate that they can't erase you. Once a rule breaker survives the microscope, they're not just a person anymore, they're proof. And proof spreads faster than any lie. That's what unsettles them most. You live by a law they didn't create. Their rule book governs the weak, the obedient, the ones too afraid to question. But you carry a code etched in scars, sharpened in silence, carved from betrayal. A law older and stronger than their systems. And every time they magnify you under their lens, they're reminded that their pages mean nothing to someone who built their own commandments. That's why they can't categorize you, why their theories collapse, why their microscopes shake. You're not lawless. You just don't live by theirs. You operate by a standard they can't reach, a code they can't read, a discipline they can't copy. That's why you terrify them. Because you prove the most dangerous truth of all. Survival doesn't come from following their rules. It comes from breaking them and writing your own. Here's the irony. They worked harder to document you than you ever did for yourself. Every rumor, every report, every whisper in the dark, it all became evidence, not of your weakness, but of your endurance. Their microscope turned into your archive. They wanted receipts of your collapse, but instead built proof of your resilience. They didn't realize that by studying you so obsessively, they were recording the rise they swore would never happen. Now the files, the stories, the whispers, they don't humiliate you, they haunt them. Because when people search for weakness, they end up finding truth. And the truth is written all over you. You broke their rule book and survived. That's the legacy they accidentally preserved. Your strength immortalized in the very research meant to erase it. They became your historians, and history doesn't ask permission to remember. They wanted to label you, contain you, turn you into a case study for failure. But legends aren't born in labs, they're born in resistance. And that's what you became. Every observation, every whisper, every magnified detail didn't shrink you. It enlarged you. You were never their subject. You were their warning. Because the closer they looked, the clearer it became. You don't just bend rules, you erase them. And when rules disappear, myths are born. That's why your story doesn't live in reports anymore. It lives in whispers, in awe, in silence that feels like reverence. They can't publish it, they can't control it, but they can't erase it either. The legends spread beyond their walls, into streets, into minds, into places microscopes can't reach. You were never their experiment. You were the anomaly that turned into myth. And myths don't fade, they multiply. They hold on to that book like it's holy, pages filled with commands designed to keep the world obedient. But every step you take is a match against its spine. You don't just bend rules, you burn them, line by line, until the smoke rises higher than their authority. That's why the microscope never leaves you. Because deep down, they know the rule book is ash, and you're the proof. They thought survival only existed inside their lines, but your scars scream otherwise. You thrived outside the blueprint, flourished in the chaos, rewrote the system by existing outside it. And that terrifies them. Because once one person breaks free, others start to question. Your defiance isn't just rebellion, it's a spark. And sparks spread. They can study you, criticize you, magnify you, but they can't change the fact that the pages are already burning, and you lit the fire. The microscope was supposed to crush you, The rule book was supposed to confine you, but destiny rewrote the script. Instead of shrinking, you expanded. Instead of folding, you broke the frame itself. And now the world can't stop staring. Not because you fit, but because you never did. You're not the experiment, not the subject, not the variable. You're the verdict. Every page they trusted lies in ashes. Every law they swore sacred is bent in your hands. Every frame of glass they used to study you now reflects their failure. That's why they whisper your name like a riddle they can't end, why they watch you like a flame they can't extinguish. The truth is undeniable. You weren't built for their rule book. You were built to dismantle it. And when the ashes settle, history won't remember their laws. It will remember the one who proved rules were never real.